Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us here today. I'm Nick Rohn, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am excited for our first Thursday at 3 program this year with Anto and Budiardjo, I think Mike can correct me, and Kimon Onuma. And we'll get to them in just a moment. But before we do, we want to thank our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, as well as all our organizational members for help making programming like this possible. So please reach out if you're interested in working with the ALN. We would really love to partner with every organization in the world because we really think that asset management and leadership really can improve the effectiveness and the mission success of just about every organization in the world. So we'll get to more of that in just a moment. We want to talk a little about upcoming events. This is next week, January 16th. Kyle Wedberg of the Government Finance Officers Association is going to do a little preview for an upcoming event of theirs featuring one of our senior fellows, David Totman, and also Earl Jackson from the Denver International Airport, where the ALN was able to help them craft an asset management policy. So it'll be good to hear back from Earl and Kyle again. And then the following week, our Water Asset Leadership web series, roundtable series starts. And so it's going to start off with Palm Beach County, Florida, where they had an ISO 55001 certified water utility, and that's the first to achieve that status in the US. So we'll be very excited to hear from a number of members from Palm Beach County, Florida water utility.
And then we'll also be talking about the ALN paper on state asset management initiatives for public water systems. We wrote that with the IAM USA.
Awesome. And the series continues, right, Mike?
Yes.
So then the following week, we'll have an EPA Water Asset Management Framework program, and with David Shelby, a returning
David
participant.
Totman for sure. And we're reaching out to EPA. Our colleague in the asset management department is David Shelby. He might not want to talk about the framework, but he may, and he might connect us to other people. But it's a really important framework. And that was a suggestion from our members to look into that more deeply. So we're going to have that be part of the series.
And then, Mike, the following week, which I believe is the close of kind of our small water mini series, is it unveiling a new tool from Mentor APM, one of our organizational members?
That is it.
So, yeah, go for it, Mike.
Asset management assessment tool that allows people to just take photographs and put them into the system and have the AI provide assessment. So the level of expertise needed is not as great. So your experts can be staying in the office and doing more important work than walking the fields. So we're really excited about that series and this program that's starting with Anto. And I want to just take a minute to say how happy we are that ALN organizational members and ALN senior fellows and supporters of all kinds have helped build a momentum that allows us to start this year off on such a high note with Anto and Kimon presenting at the ASHRAE, American Society of Heating and Refrigerating Air Conditioning Engineers winter meeting in Orlando, and we'll be talking about that with them. So then the Government Finance Officers Association wanted to work with the ALN to have a policy presentation to their members because policy is so critical in leading change that will stay despite people changing positions, leadership positions. And the GFOA presentation costs money, so we're not even promoting it as something for the ALN to attend. But the GFOA is going to make the video available to us, so you'll be able to see what Earl Jackson says about how they not only developed their asset management policy, but built onto it equity and inclusiveness into policy. And that's really important. And we're so glad that the GFOA sees that as being important also. And the roundtable and water series indicates what we're going to be doing in the future in a subscription model. We've been doing everything for free for so long. We're going to try to figure out how to generate a little bit of revenue from these programs that we put on, and that'll be coming up in the future. And then there is the National Facility Management Technology Association, our relationship with the Coalition for Smarter Buildings. They're going to have, we'll bring Anto on and let's start talking about that event you've got going, Anto.
Hey, Mike. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I work primarily in the real-time control systems, HVAC, lighting, and energy management systems. And there's obviously a significant amount of technology changes that's going on in the world. And a lot of it is the implementation of IT kind of technologies, which is really what I've been working on pretty much all my life. And a lot of that work has sort of been done under the banner of the Coalition for Smarter Buildings, that is a partner organization of ALN. And one of the sort of interesting things that's happening is the C4SB is in the process of becoming part of the Linux Foundation. And the Linux Foundation, for those who are not familiar with that organization, is a foundation that manages obviously the Linux open source code, but it's also an organization that manages a lot of thousands of other projects that's sort of related to cloud native computing and computing generally. And this is a very, very significant change for the industry. So we are preparing to go to AHR, which is the trade show that is held at the same time as the ASHRAE winter meeting in Orlando in February, starting February 9th. And one of the sort of interesting things that we're doing is that the discussion about IT technologies in HVAC has been sort of bubbling along for literally decades, but we think this is a very significant change. So we wanted to sort of communicate the enormity of this change. We've basically gone down the path of using the "Who Moved My Cheese" sort of allegory to actually communicate what's actually going on here, the changes that's going on. So we've been talking about the "Who Moved Your Cheese" sort of concept in Monday Live, which is a show that we do every Monday, and that is going to be the theme of the AHR Expo and ASHRAE outing, because we really want to communicate that it's not just one thing that's changed, it's actually a lot of things that's changed, both technology and practices, how you buy stuff and how you deploy stuff and how you build stuff. Literally, it sort of impacts everything. And one of the sort of interesting things that Mike and I had some email exchange, and he's sort of familiar with this, is that from an asset management perspective, he kind of went straight to, why don't you just move the cheese somewhere where it needs to be moved so that behavior can change? So I kind of want to leave it there and hand it back to you, Mike, as being a sort of a driving force, to sort of a driving concept to link the enormous change in the trades to the asset leadership kind of way of thinking about it.
Anto, this is perfect. Thank you for setting this up, because it really emphasizes the fact that what we're talking about with asset management is so foundational to the way organizations achieve their mission, that when you implement asset management, when you get all of the departments sharing information in a similar manner, when you're using secure open standards, it transforms everything. You can't go in there and talk about incremental benefits. You said it. How you purchase things changes. That has ramifications all the way through accounting. Leaders have to be committed to transformational change and the disruption, but more importantly, the resolution that will occur when this happens. And the way the world works is leaders don't come to conferences, they speak at conferences. It's very few leaders that come to conferences. It's managers, it's vice presidents, it's people who then present to the leaders to make decisions. So our challenge has always been, how do we tell a leadership story for managers to tell to their leaders? And Who Moved My Cheese is about the world changing and us looking for rewards in the same places, but not finding them. And I think the new book should be Move the Cheese, where leaders actually move it and reward people for acting in the ways that are beneficial to the organization. And it's a complex message, but I'm really happy to be working with you, especially with this great effort that you're doing with the Linux Foundation that will allow building automation and assets that can communicate with each other to help operations improve.
Just the other comment that I make is that I'm obviously representing that sort of sector, that silo, as it were, the HVAC, this the real-time system. But this will happen in all silos in all different areas, right? So this is just an example. I don't want you to get too too hung up about this is ASHRAE and this is HVAC. It's the concept of the fact that there's a very significant change, and the thing that's actually going to propel us forward can't happen within the silos. It really needs to happen at the higher level, and this is the whole sort of asset picture.
And that's why we're excited to be involved with the National Institute of Building Sciences. Right. The last ALN Thursday at 3, we had George Goosejaw speak, the president and CEO of NIBS, saying that they are now looking at horizontal structures, roads, bridges, water systems, electrical systems, as things that are buildings. Humans build them. So the same thing applies to all of that also. And we're really happy to be seeing this understanding of the holistic approach that's necessary. But I really like the way you focus on HVAC. It allows people to get their mind around it before they apply it across the entire organization.
Which is obviously the same in the BIM and the other side of things with Kimon. So
yes. So speaking of Kimon, he is in Pasadena, seeing orange skies and ashes coming down like snow around him. And so while we're excited about asset management and what it can do for society, there's a real solemn, situation where information hasn't been shared properly, and it leads to problems. And we don't want to be ambulance chasing, but hey, everyone, asset management offers a solution to the complex problems that we are facing together as a single human race. Hi, Kimon. How is it going there?
Hello. Good. Yeah, we're outside of the evacuation zone, but it looks like it's snowing outside with ashes falling. And it reminds me of even last month, Anto, you were having similar escape issues from Asheville. So it's across the country and across the world.
Yep.
which is kind of it's really kind of an asset management issue or an information management issue too, I think. And it's interesting is this, there's no corner to escape to.
Well, yeah, the architectural art of problem solving teaches us that if you articulate the problem in clear and meaningful way, like you can't say, I want to build stairs to the moon, but if you
Mhm.
articulate a real problem that can be addressed, there's not only one solution, but we can design multiple solutions for you to choose from. So
Right.
that's a
Yeah.
setup for you, Kimon, as an architect. You're joining Anto at the ASHRAE event. What are
Mhm.
you bringing to that, and where uh, do you think this can go?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is before the event with Anto, I have another one next week. That's why I have this background in Greece on the background, but I have a session with the design intelligence, but it's kind of the similar themes. And I think we need to kind of bring the industry together. Like Anto said, it's about mechanical system, but it's not. It actually applies to everything. And that's kind of been our view, I think, for a long time of how it's kind of universal. These challenges are universal and can replace mechanical equipment with, fires or whatever, or floods or whatever. It's how do you deal with information and in a way that we can react to and manage assets more efficiently. Is it okay if I show a few slides, Mike?
Please.
Yeah, so let me see if I can share. Okay, there we go.
We're seeing a warehouse.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm starting with this is an Amazon warehouse, and in 2002, Jeff Bezos put a mandate out. This was 2002. This is over 2 decades ago, where he basically, from a governance perspective, he demanded his teams to share information in an open way without exception, or you will be fired, basically. I don't know if it's urban legend or if he really said it or not. I think he actually had something along these lines, but basically said, we're shifting Amazon to be able to use these open connections to do what we do best and to externalize these, to design them from the ground up to communicate internally, but also to make them externalizable, to be able to connect to other systems, which is essentially what I think a lot of the digital twin discussions are. But going back to your comment about governance, all these technologies have been around for a long time. There's nothing magical about that, although the IBB and what's happening with that and what we're going to be presenting at AHR is pretty exciting because it's really open standards, open source, ways of communicating like that.
In a secure
Um,
manner.
in a secure manner, yeah, that's
Before
kind of
you
the
leave that
mixture
one,
here.
Anto, do you
Mhm.
see that as being a big cheese move?
Oh yeah.
That's an owner saying, your cheese has
Mhm.
been moved.
Yeah, I took your cheese. If you don't come get it, you have no more cheese or whatever. Yeah. So that obviously he has Bezos has the ability to mandate this from an organization perspective, but I think the thrust of this is that any owner should be able to make that kind of declaration. I think a lot of owners and owners of information and owners of assets are pretty timid about just being driven by the technology and what the vendor community or whoever out there is driving the discussion, and owners need to step into it. And I think that's where ISO really comes in and you need to demand this kind of interoperability. In this presentation next week, I'm kind of latching on to this Stuart Brand book from the 1990s, which was interesting to me. And I read it back then. I kind of reread it again, but he talks about the wisdom of what can buildings teach us, how they're learning and what they call the shearing layers of change. So stuff inside the building is constantly changing. You said space is kind of changing every few years. Services and equipment, HVAC systems, you said 7 to 15 years. And there's even more, instructors even more, and the site is more or less permanent, according to him. And I think that's changed. The environment is constantly changing, as we have seen, which impacts everything about what we do, which impacts everything about our buildings and facilities. Nothing is static anymore. And even obviously the systems, if we're thinking of IoT, they're constantly reporting what's going on. So our buildings and cities and environment are all living and interacting. And if we think of any of them as static, then we're basically, and this is the canary in the coal mine, if we can't shift fast enough, we're not going to be able to survive. And I think that's the opportunity for us as an industry and as owners from a governance perspective to demand this of our environment, of our service providers, of our vendors, of the way we manage assets, the way we manage mechanical equipment, and on and on. I'm going to pause here for a second. Any thoughts on that? Kind of see if there's any agreement, disagreement
So
with
if you
this.
want to jump in on this one, I put up a link to the Design Futures Council, which is the event next week in La Jolla that Kimon is speaking at. It's kind of like a TED Talks for design industry. And the focus on owners asking for this, I think, is critical. And I think people have the understanding that buildings are getting smarter. There is the Coalition for Smarter Buildings, but there needs to be a governance about it so that all these different parts of the building that can talk to each other now are able to speak the same language. And as citizens, we are owners of our government. We can demand this from our state and local governments. And that's why we're happy to be doing more in state and local governments also, bringing these concepts forward.
And I think the other shift here is, as an architect and as and engineers and builders, we tend to think of buildings and assets as being static because we're contracted to, hey, we need a new building. You spend all this effort to kind of design all this stuff, the mechanical systems and everything. You deliver the bricks and mortar, and then you walk away from it. But you are, as you're making those decisions of what systems to put in a building, we're kind of forecasting forward to what's going to happen next year or next day or 10 years from now. But we're not really connected to that information. It's really all just thrown away. It's just gone after the building is complete, no matter how great it is. And we've seen this over and over, even with building information models, with amazing architects that are doing amazing work. We're not delivering the information. It's essentially thrown away. The owners don't have access to it. There's some good things happening, but it's just very rare and not enough. And it's really our bad in many ways that we're not stepping to the plate, but it's also the owners that are not demanding it. They're not knowing to demand it, I think.
And we need to involve the legal teams, but still it's the owners who have to say, if you design us an energy saving system and it does save us energy over 20 years, you get to share in some of that saving over 20 years. There needs to be the incentive for that long-term holding. And then the industry needs to change from being project oriented, where you just walk away at the end of the project, like you said. That's part of the problem, is being contractually connected to the building not leaking for 20 years.
Right.
And being
Even if we have that,
yeah,
exactly. Even if we get that LEED platinum plaque that you put on the front door, it's absolutely meaningless if you don't follow through and see what it really does. You're just designing to that intent. You're putting the mechanical systems in there, and then they're not functioning the way they are because there's no operation manual. There's no even awareness of what systems are in the building. So these amazing BIMs that are being delivered, very dense models, it's really just crazy that we are not following through and delivering that information. We're putting it into documents and digital formats that are useless, and that air handling unit or that VAV in the ceiling is just doing its thing, but it fails and the owners don't know where it is. They don't know the IDs. It's just, and I'm not exaggerating it. This is just industry wide. And then they send teams back out there to reverse engineer the building and say, where was that mechanical equipment? Oh, we need to go find it on the roof, and it was installed last year. Oh, this is a LEED platinum building. Who cares if you can't find it? It's meaningless.
yeah.
So I'm going to shift a little bit to a 20-year ago discussion. This is with the Coast Guard 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, where they wanted to build their assets in a building information modeling and GIS format. We are involved in this. Okay, now let's build all this stuff, but what are we going to do with this now? Okay, yeah, you can obviously have floor plans. You can fly through the building and look at it in 3D and everything. But what else can you do with it? And it's like, we told them from an owner's perspective, this is a roadmap strategy. You can start running simulations. What can we do with this? What if we need to, what if 9/11, which is what happened back then, 9/11 hit, the Coast Guard changed to Homeland Security. Their mission changed as an owner, which means they needed to shift their facilities on the fly to support the new demand they had on them. And we said, if you have access to your information, you can make decisions. And they said, like what? And we said, well, like your facility in Seattle, we built a BIM of this whole facility. And it's okay, it looks great. What do we do with it? And it's okay, what if this is 20 years ago. What if a truck was driving on an Alaskan highway and it blew up on that corner? We just made a random scenario up. Your building is 5 feet away from or from the property line there and 25 feet from Alaskan highway. And their face kind of turned white at the meeting. They said, and I've come to find out that the West Coast operation of the Coast Guard was in that building right behind that orange dot. We just randomly selected it. If that building went down, the West Coast operation of managing the West Coast, everything about the Coast Guard would go down. Within a week, they said, we need to build a new building. And we need to figure out, and Mike wrote an article, actually. Mike Bornell sitting in front of us right there in Engineering News 20 years ago, wrote an article about modeling the tools for the plan for the worst, for vulnerability. So risk assessment, which is, we're still constantly faced with that, right? A week later, they had an RFP for a new building. There's a new building, and they asked us to do 35 of these around the US. They said, we have command centers around the US. Can you set up a system that defines the requirements that we can put this in Miami or put this in Alaska and adjust the requirements and shift those demands? And inside those buildings, obviously, there are systems and other things that are supporting that business driver. So this is an owner saying, here's the why we need to move this building. We need to move it right away. And we need to look at our whole inventory across the US and think in terms of how do we create a system that says, here are our requirements, and we can communicate that with the design team, with the facility team, and then also link it to our asset requirements and operational requirements. 20 years ago, nothing's changed. It's all still the same.
So
Well,
Kimon, basically what
stop
you
sharing
did,
your screen so we can get into discussion now. Thank you, Anto.
yeah, what you basically did was you said your cheese is in the wrong place.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
And
it
was relatively easy for them to say, oh, okay, let's just move the cheese to somewhere where it should be.
Exactly.
And lots of other things then happened.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So since we've been saying this for 20 years, we have not the courage of our convictions, we have the confidence of our convictions, and we're going to owners and we're saying using secure open standards will dramatically change the way you achieve your mission outcomes. It's going to impact everything. Asset management is the governance that will give you confidence to make these transformational changes. And then Anto, you come in with the ability to demonstrate those benefits through the IBB, the interoperable building box.
Yeah, I think the sort of issue is that, Kimon says your cheese in the wrong place. Great. So the sort of the realization from the asset owner is, okay, it clearly is in the wrong place. I have to move it somewhere. Right. And obviously this is a very physical move, so it's kind of simple to think about. But if you start to think about IT, it's much more subtle and nuanced because it's talking about security and digital architecture and all that kind of stuff. The sort of the thinking around what do we do at AHR and how do we sort of influence the ASHRAE community is, what does that mean for them? How does the cheese moving from one place to another allow them to stay in business or increase their business or whatever it is, right? To just and not go out of business, right? So because that's really the perception that you would get from somebody that's in a silo, is that, oh, the cheese has moved, right? I have no idea why the cheese has moved, right? And it's very, very damaging to me, so I'm going to resist
Mhm.
it. So I think that's the
Yeah.
dynamics that we have to deal with, because at that point they don't understand why the cheese moved.
Well, what's great about how you've got things set up for this AHR conference for the Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers is you're doing a workshop the day before the series, the conference starts, and
Yep.
you're exposing the people to the processes that you're talking about so that they can see themselves in
Exactly.
the future, how these work. Oh, I'm still relevant because of this.
Yeah, and we're using the who moved my cheese concept to sort of communicate that. And one of the things that we're actually going to be talking about is, like, who controls your cheese? Do you control your cheese, or does your cheese control you?
Yeah.
Kind of concept, right?
Yeah.
Are you being told what to do by something that you don't understand, or you should be sort of in a better place than that if you're going to be successful in pursuing this.
Can you even see it? Because that's actually the other problem when you have these different legacy systems or approaches that are not open enough. You can't even see the cheese. They're in the different silos, and you don't even realize it. And that's the opportunity, I think, with AHRs. You have a lot of cheese with mechanical systems, but if the mechanical systems aren't talking to the buildings and aren't talking to the governance and aren't talking to the business needs of the Coast Guard or whoever it might be, it
Right.
doesn't matter that you have great cheese if you don't know how to deal with it. And that's the current condition of the industry is so fragmented, and we are so focused. I'm talking about the industry as a whole now. We're so focused on creating kind of our little silo to create that business opportunity to sell and lock the data in our systems and sell it over and over to that owner and not let anybody else in, which means that cheese is only available to one tool.
Proprietary
And the
cheese.
owners need, yeah, and it
So
just starts to rot.
Deke Smith, who has been doing this for more than 20 years,
Oh,
asks,
Deke's on.
what
Hey,
are we
Deke.
missing if we have been talking about this for 20 years? Well, we're not missing anything. But actually, the point of your question is very good. And we're the asset leadership network. And we need to be communicating more directly to leaders and helping them understand that it's okay for them to move the cheese. Matter of fact, they have to, and that they can't do it incrementally. It's transformational activities. And the fact that the Denver City and County Department of Transportation and Infrastructure came to the ALN and got guidance on establishing policy to help them change the way they operate. We need to be doing more of that. So that's why we're happy that Earl Jackson is speaking to the Government Finance Officers Association. Anto and Kimon, you've both been at this for a long time too. What do you think are the things that we're missing that we need to communicate?
Being a technologist, I'd say the technology has significantly changed in 20 years, because I was thinking about these same thoughts 20 years ago, but the sort of things that we can do is just completely different. It's just a different level. So that's clearly it. But I think this kind of thinking from an asset perspective is also certainly not something that was I'm very familiar with, certainly going back 20 years. So it's the enabling technology and the sort of a different perspective, a holistic perspective.
Kimon?
Yeah, yeah, definitely the technology has changed. And actually, Joe, who's online, mentioned that the Amazon's an API, and we've been using APIs for years. I think APIs opened up the ability to connect between different systems rather than extracting data and manually transforming and importing it back into another system, which is still okay to a certain extent. But what excited me when I started talking to Anto a few years ago about the IBB is even taking the APIs and standardizing them so you don't have to recreate them every time. And that's huge because APIs are great because you have many systems talking to each other, but if that starts ballooning into more and more systems, it's not scalable. Therefore, we need kind of a standardized way of talking to each other, right? Just that simple communication. The Coast Guard example is, hey, there's a blast going on at this latitude and longitude on the corner of the street. Okay, who else is impacted by that? Well, there's a server in that building that might take down the Coast Guard, whatever. It's very simple connections that say that something's happening or what systems are in the building. With that open connectivity with the technology, in other words, the technology is already there. The will to create standards and open standards is there. The governance of demanding that is needed more. And maybe that goes back to Deek's question. There's not enough governance. In the 20 years, maybe that's one thing that I've seen huge miss over and over again with, especially with a lot of government agencies, is not enough demand or even understanding to ask the right questions to demand that functionality, especially if this amount of resources and money is being spent on asset management and portfolios, that they have the ability to do that, I think.
So
I think one word that you didn't use, Kimon, is standardization. Because you know the one of the problems with the APIs is it allows you to do lots of things, but in a way none of it is standard. None of it is standardized, right? Because you know, to turn a light on and off is the same whatever light and whatever switch it is, right? So there should be a standard way of turning a light on and off digitally.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And a system, some light provider would say, yeah, here's my API to do it, but that's not standardized. That's his way, his or her way of doing it.
Yeah. It's like having a plug that's not standard. It has 5 prongs on it that are whatever,
right,
weird shapes. And yeah, it works for them, but they can sell that. They can say, look, this plug works great here, but you can't expand that into everything that we need to do.
So, Deek, one of the things that we've been missing is a populace that understands that technology has transformed the way we live. And those of us who were in the forefront of technology understood this was coming, but now everybody gets that. And so it's easier to deliver the message to the owners to say, use secure open standards, like Jeff Bezos said, and that will transform the way everything works. So we just were, 20 years ahead. People needed to understand Uber and that works, and we can do that.
And it doesn't have to be complex. Like since you mentioned Uber, that's another important piece to this. And this is also a focus on IBB. How do you break down these connections between silos and keep them as simple as possible so different developers can build apps on top of that? If you make it overly complex, then it just collapses on itself, which we've seen failures over and over again with building information modeling. It looks great, it looks really complex, but if you build all that, then who's going to maintain it, for example? It just collapses immediately. As soon as you deliver it, it's almost like delivering a static file that nobody knows what to do with. But if you keep it simple and you standardize it, like Anto says, then it starts to be repeatable.
Yeah, and the thing that people say about simplifying things is they'll think, but there's lots of things that needs to be communicated, right? So the other word to use there is composability, right? Because you need to be able to compose things, right? I need to be able to turn the light on and off, but I also need to know the temperature, right? I don't have to do that as one big complex API integration, but if I can control the light and I can do the temperature, whatever the other thing is, separately, they're both standardized, it's much easier.
Yeah.
Lego bricks.
Yeah. Exactly. And if I have an app that actually can control that light through some kind of another functionality, then I can plug that in and from a composability perspective, add new functionality on top of what you just described there. But if you try and figure it all out, design it all, it just becomes monolithic and just collapses. So this composability of small modules like Legos, like we keep talking about, you can unplug one, throw away that app, bring another app in, which is what we were used to with our mobile devices. Everything becomes disposable as far as apps go. The functionality is, the need is there, the business need is there, but you need to be able to build anything you want on top of that.
Deke and John both wrote something at the same time that I think is critically important. Deke says it's not the technology as much as the outcome, and John says it's the psychological, sociological elements. And that's where leadership, that's why we say we're leadership, because it's only through leadership that you can change the behaviors of the organization. And the Bezos example is the perfect example. Deke references, one that he had. Admiral Allen at the Coast Guard tells a story about how he said, either you help me solve the problems. He said to the 600-person engineering department, either you help me solve the problems that I have stated, or I will disband the entire engineering department and subcontract to anyone in the world who can help me solve these problems. Boom, he started getting responses very quickly. And we have gone over. It was too lively of a discussion, but that's all right. This is really a good topic. And I want to thank Anto and Kimon for joining us today. And I'll be joining you in Orlando at AHR and providing the Asset Leadership Network governance perspective. And part of the thing, Deke, is I think we need to have our messages at levels. Owners, the top leaders need to have the level of message require secure open standards. And that's it. Don't tell them anything else. Then talk to managers about what the rest of this means and goes into levels of detail for each of the different people who are involved. But it's got to be leveled messages, I think. Anyway, Anto, any message you want to convey before seeing people in Orlando?
I can't wait to be in the warmth of Orlando.
It was not hard to get me to go to Orlando in February from Chicago. Kimon?
And I look forward to it too. Get out of the smoke here.
Yeah. So Nick, if you can come on and bring us home, that would be great.
Of course. Yeah, thanks to all the speakers and also the attendees who stuck around. Obviously, an engaging program. Thank you to Anto and Kimon for making it as such. And thank you to our patron members, especially Onuma, but Jacobs, Mantech, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI as well. And all our organizational members and really everyone involved in the ALN helps us do these programs and keep bringing new and interesting topics before everyone out there. Really appreciate the interest in just moving the needle forward for organizations as individuals, but also as society as a whole. And again, we have a bunch of upcoming events. So next week, the Government Finance Officers Association, a bit of a preview for their upcoming event with Kyle Wedberg, and also the start of our Water Asset Leadership Roundtable Series.
I got to tell you, I'm so excited. I've been trying for years to get Palm Beach County to talk about their ISO 55001 and Mark Knight and this paper that George Galambos created for our organizations was the key to getting them involved. So that was great.
And then the series continues the following 2 weeks with the EPA Water Asset Management Framework presentation and AI Asset Management Assessment for water asset and all assets. So, Mike?
Yeah, that's from Mentor APM, and framework conversation is going to continue throughout the year. We're going to be talking about the Victoria, Australia framework, and link them in with Ontario and their governance structure from their legislation. And we think that increasing framework discussions will be an important part of advancing asset management in the year.
Awesome. Well, we hope to see you all next week. Thanks, everyone, for sticking around.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.